All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today is February 5th, 2020, and I'm back with another edition of the Wednesday live show. And we got some new stocks that are triggering in today. We have a pretty significant gap up this morning, which is kind of unusual. And let's see, Rick Santelli's on TV, ISM non manufacturing index, a little bit better than expected. Market faded a little bit at the open and is trying to rally back up. We're at new all-time highs, right in the thick of earnings season. Boy, there's a lot going on, really. So let's dive into the charts here. And there you go. There's the S&P like poking right up here at the all-time highs. Interestingly enough, I had this trend line going, and I'll tell you, with all the craziness going on in the market, trend lines are I don't know how much you can put in just like this. Obviously, like this trend line break, which I just extended to here for now. Got a little break of that trend line on coronavirus fears. Let's see, that was Friday, right? That was the big initially, right? Had a gap down and a little bit of bounce to close the gap, and then on Friday nobody wanted to have risk on over the weekend. That's basically what it was, and so had a pretty decent little gap open Monday, and then just sort of this runaway move here. So this is interesting. If you look at the SPY, a couple of really significant gaps here, and of course the SPY is right up. Looks like, yeah, it kind of looks like it actually is at a closing high right now. So be interesting to see if it can continue to push. And I got to tell you, these a couple of gaps like this kind of kind of make you wonder. The big move came last night when the European session opened. Was it like 3 in the morning? Or yeah, no, it was actually a little bit after three, about almost 3:30 a.m. Eastern time is when the market like really sort of took off, and kind of crazy. You can see, look at these gaps on the SPY 5 minute chart here. Pretty amazing. So it is what it is, right? I think everybody got pretty bearish here based on all the coronavirus news, and somehow I don't think that it's solved or whatever. But they say when the market sells off on these type of things, obviously it's temporary. Although I can't help but think that that's going to affect it's going to affect the economy somehow, right down the road. So I think Nike came out last night and said that it was going to affect their business, right? So lots of crazy stuff going on. Everybody's talking about Tesla, which is had this insane sort of parabolic run up. I think it was up like 50% and this month, and doubled this. I mean, just craziness here. So I mean, look at the ranges on this thing. So a lot of gambling going on here, and of course Tesla was one of the. This is a humongous short squeeze. Anyway, lots and lots going on, but the thing I wanted to focus in on today was the fact that we got some new stocks triggering in. I wanted to actually take a look at those and see what they look like here at the open, and see where they opened in relation to the trigger price, right? Because um, you know anymore you have absolutely no idea where a stock is going to open in relation to where it closed the day before, right? It's just a sort of a new feature or a bug of the market, right? Back in the old days, stocks used to open, typically near where they closed the previous session, unless there was some sort of news, right? Like earnings, or a press release or something like that. A stock would normally, but now, and you saw the gaps on the S&P, and so we're kind of in what I would say unusual times. And so anyway, let's just take a quick look here and see. Last night I marked the I marked the trigger prices on the charts of these stocks that are triggering in right now, right? So I mean, here's a good example. Let's look at the 5 minute here. So I mean, literally, unless, and I'm not sure that I really recommend buying in like the first 5 minutes of the session, right? Or and I mean, it's hard to tell. You have to be watching like the time and sales and all that. Sometimes you get, a little blip or whatever. But generally speaking, on something like this, you probably better off just sort of holding off and seeing what happens for a little bit. And so anyway, I would say that this would have been a good opportunity. You probably could have got in if you liked the look of this one. This is a Chinese stock, right? So I'm not really, out of all these ones that I've looked at here, I'm not really sure this would have been my favorite. But I would have say, this would have been one that could have, and this is pretty gappy too. This is a very volatile and gappy stock because it's a Chinese stock. So there you go. This one's getting filled here. Boy, it's a long way down to just a low of a couple of days ago. So this is not really my favorite pattern. It could easily work out and be right back at the highs in no time, right? Let's see here. Moving on. ROST. So here's the exact opposite, right? It gapped up and hasn't looked back yet, right? And so, on an expensive stock like this, not a huge gap. But then again, um, if you wait, if you held off or whatever, it hasn't closed the gap or faded back down. It hasn't come back down to the yet anyway. This is actually a pretty decent looking chart, right? Really nice uptrend, and it has a habit. You can see this, has a habit of like these sort of pullbacks or dips, right? There's another one, and it kind of zigzags down in the context of this uptrend, and so there you go. I don't know. Let's see if I draw a trend line. If I draw a trend line sort of across all this, yeah, nice uptrend. And this actually it started to get really extended, and so that was a pretty decent little pullback there. So that's got a nice look to it. All right. Now, of course, we're seeing a lot of really crazy action. Seeing a lot of, what I would say, is kind of crazy action in the market, and so the way that this stock is sort of extended from this kind of spike low here is a little bit concerning, but what you'd like to probably see some consolidation. So it'll be interesting. This is actually, I think, out of all the charts, this is one of the better looking ones that I looked at last night. So there you go. That thing's triggering in here. This, oh boy, this is something. This is pretty crazy right here because obviously, funny thing about this. Let's see. I, this is really an anomaly, to be honest with you, because, and I don't know what the. Let me look and see something here. I wanted to see if. So the earnings came out yesterday. So this would have been on the pending list. The earnings came out yesterday, and yeah, this is a pretty good example. It's always good to check that too, right? The system, if the system has a stock that's pending and earnings are coming out, it's either gonna trigger in on a good earnings reaction, or if you get one of those big gap downs, then it's not. So this would have probably been a good one to see it at the open. And all you got to do is like pull up the pull something up, and you'd see that the earnings were coming out. So the funny thing about this, the target, I'll just draw the target on here. there was there's the target 84.25. So obviously a gap of this magnitude, and this, you wouldn't have wanted to jump in here. So, quite frankly, it'll be interesting to see what happens here, but I would say that this is still viable. This is probably still viable on a move back up through the target from underneath. That's what I would say. Maybe give it a day or so. Um, but yeah, I mean, with this kind of crazy range here, this thing could easily move back up through the target and I'm sorry, back up through the entry and to the target like today. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but when you see this kind of crazy price action, it's entirely possible. So let me zoom in on that. Let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and mark this here just so I have it. Target 84.25. There you go. Yeah, some wild price action right there. The high on this thing, look at that. The high up there, 93.58. Crazy. Again, though, decent looking stock. Really nice pullback, and the system itself obviously is just looking for what we always talk about here on the show. It's looking for stocks and primary uptrends that have these type of pullbacks and then reverse, and then theoretically the trend sort of resumes. This just happens to be an anomaly based on the fact that they released earnings after the bell last night. So yeah, it might be a good idea to give it a little time to calm down, but I'd say it's still completely viable on the way back up through the trigger. So, and last but not least, we have this MYOK. Yeah, this is really a nice one. This has got a pretty good look to it here. This little sort of pullback that we're just coming off of here looks a little bit. This one was a little bit faster, like it happened in a quicker amount of time and kind of had a little bounce, sort of retested the lower end of the range, and then had a nice rally back up towards the highs. This, I don't know. I have no idea what that was, but that kind of looks like some sort of news or something. But anyway, yeah, it's got a pretty good look to it. You know, really nice sort of. I mean, look at the sell down here. We had all these red days in a row where they kind of walked it down, and then you had that pivot low reversal day, and then a little bit more walk down and a higher low, and then it just started turning around. So that's got a pretty good look to it. Biggest caveat here is that today it was a really long range day yesterday, and so today's open is kind of questionable, right? But again, of course, the overall market, and let's see what's going on here with this, because boy, the move from the lows on Friday or even the close on Friday, this sort of crazy kind of move here, gotta leave you a little bit skeptical about whether the market can just keep going up from here. Um, I don't like these kind of moves in the overall market. That's one thing if you got a. It's one thing if you got a stock that actually goes on like some sort of run like this. It's always great if you're holding a stock and it has one of these sort of these breakaway gaps, I guess they call them, based on something. But the overall market itself, yeah, there's not. I think a lot of this could be potential, like short covering and short squeezes and that, because I mean there's not a whole lot of great news out there. If anything, there's a lot of uncertainty in the overall market, which theoretically you wouldn't see this kind of move, and so this is a really odd environment, I should say, right? I mean the economy, so GDP's running a couple of percent, and the Fed says that they're on hold. Interest rates are low, but valuation wise, the market is at the high end of historical valuations, like by just about any metric that you can see. And the funny thing was, is that last Wednesday, and we had the Fed meeting last Wednesday, and I should have marked that on the chart. When was it? It was right here. So usually these Fed days, I like to mark them on the chart, or at least have some sort of thing, just so I can remember when they were. Right? There was there was the last interest rate cut by the Fed. Obviously, I didn't mark the December meeting on here, but anyway, so that was Fed day right there, and Powell had a statement during the I think it was during the press conference, yeah, where he was asked about valuations, and he said something to the effect that kind of like what Yellen said years ago, that asset valuations are at the higher end of the range. So anyhow, it is what it is. There's a lot of this little area that we have here is starting to remind me of back here, right? And this was a lot of consternation based on the trade deal with China, I believe, if I recall. But you had some pretty big ups and downs, and the market go down, and everybody get bearish for a few days, and then you get a big rebound out of the blue, and then you'd think, oh, the worst is over, and then next thing you know, another big sell down, and so it looks like we're in for some choppiness here, right? That seems to be what's happening here, and I'm kind of ignoring the fact that we're at all-time highs, right? I mean, just because we're at all-time highs doesn't necessarily mean that the market can't have a bunch of big ups and downs and get really choppy. And so, I mean, obviously, you easily you could easily get a move to new all-time highs. And so, going back to the short squeeze thing, you can imagine that there's probably a lot of, I won't say a lot, but I don't know who shorts anymore, but there's probably participants that are short with stops like, right above the all-time highs. That would kind of make sense. Or just thinking, okay, they shorted into this, and then as long as thinking that maybe that's a near-term top or some kind of top, and so they short, and then they put their stops like just over the highs there. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens from here. Keep an open mind. The worst thing that's happening right now is that we got that big gap up, right? Two big gap ups. So anyway, on the open trades here, you'll see that these the first four stocks on the open trades are the ones that are triggering in today. And so let's take a look at the trades that were already open. That's a more important thing. So let's see. This this is a really sort of crazy, interesting one. If you zoom into it, I mean, it looks pretty good, right? It had this real nice stair step run up, and then a nice orderly pullback. If you zoom way out on this chart, you see that it's like sort of a bottoming pattern. And quite frankly, I mean, there's a lot of stocks out there that have similar sort of bottoming patterns that look pretty darn good. And so it's honestly got kind of a cup and handle pattern, and so it's got a pretty good look to it. Honestly, it really does. And so it's sort of hanging around the trigger here, right? So right in the neighborhood of the trigger, so it doesn't look too bad. Actually, yesterday it kind of had one of those down days or whatever, but the near term trend is still sort of up, and it does look like it's attempting to break out of the handle of this, and so we'll see. If you zoom out on the chart like this, it doesn't look like it's that far up to making a significant move. All it needs to get is a little bit of traction coming out of this pattern here, and then got something. So, and moving on, we got NUVA, which has had some pretty crazy price action here. Same sort of thing, just sort of hanging right around that trigger price. This was nice uptrend, and this is really in the near term here. this was the first decent pullback the stocks had. Had a few, had a like a real big sell off here back in September. Happened in like 4 days, right? But this was more of the type of pullback that the system's going to look for. It's kind of orderly there, and so this is looking pretty good actually. The stop the stop has already moved up, and since the stock is still hanging around this area here, hasn't made much forward progress based on the closing prices. So this stop is still trying. It ratcheted up once, and it's still just hanging here in the neighborhood. Um, it's not a bad stop for considering it's an expensive stock, and a little over a couple of bucks there. So far so good. This actually looks pretty good. It looks pretty good for a continuation up towards the highs here. So let's see. I might as well draw the target on this while I'm here. The target on this is basically up here. So this thing's going to need to really rally back up and hit a new high, which does not look all that inconceivable. So there we go. And real quick, I'll just mark it on here so I have it. Target on NUVA is 76.30. Or I'm sorry, that's a stop. I'm looking at my other screen here. The target is 82.50. There we go. That makes more sense. So looks entirely feasible. Just needs to get a continuation here of this sort of little reversal that it's got going on. So, all right. So let's see. Next on the list is Wendy's, which is Wendy's really came. Let's see what yesterday's high was 22.57. So there's a trigger back here. There's a trigger price. There's the open. So it's pretty close to the this thing loves to go up down up down up down, and so yesterday we had a really nice sort of push through the past couple of weeks of price bars, which is that's a pretty positive sign, right? Very positive sign. So maybe we get a little backing and filling here today, and then tomorrow, or then within the next couple of days. I mean, hopefully it doesn't retrace all the way back down here. So you got kind of a range going now, right? You got the lower end of the range, and then the target up here would be the upper end of the range, considering it came within a few pennies of it yesterday. So interestingly enough, Wendy's, you can see these other trades here. It has a pretty good habit of getting enough juice to hit these targets. So far so good on that. And the other nice thing about it is that it's relatively low price stock, and it's not extremely volatile. I mean, it looks volatile on the chart, but these increments over here are 10 cents, right? So if we look at, just for the fun of it, I want to look at a 14-day ATR, average true range. Oh wow, 41 cents. So that's it. That's interesting because you figure on a $22 stock, I'm just gonna do the math here real quick. So if I take 41 cents, divide it by the current price, 22.35, that's basically like 2% average over the last 14 days. 2% average range. Well, that doesn't seem right. Maybe I did it wrong. Anyway, the average range of this 40 cents a day. So yesterday it actually you had like basically a 1 ATR move. So it's kind of interesting. It tends to have almost a 1 ATR move on a daily basis. So that's pretty interesting, honestly. But in the past, it's done pretty well. Let's take a look at the next one, Campbell's Soup. Campbell Soup is just kind of hanging around up here. Not too exciting of a stock, obviously, but not looking too bad. Went over this last week. I drew these lines on here and talked about how it had a tendency to go from top of the range to the bottom of the range and kind of bouncing and within the context of this uptrend. And so basically we're looking for caught it on the way up over here, right? It basically had this sell off from the top to the bottom of the range and then reversed and started coming up. And so we're just looking for a continuation and a move back towards the top of the range, and all will be good. So, not looking so bad there. Nothing too exciting. And considering the volatility that we've seen in the market and that sell-off last Friday, it's kind of nice that none of these open trades really got smashed, right? And there's a lot of stocks that got hit really hard, and we haven't really seen that in these particular stocks that the system has open. Last but not least is probably the best one of all. Um, so here you go. Insulet Corp. And I don't know if you guys remember when I marked these, like shortly after it triggered in. I talked about how the symmetry between that pullback and trend line break, if you can call it that, and that big run up, and then it looked kind of symmetrical this time to what happened back here, and then you're getting something similar. It's not nearly as dramatic as that was, but you can see how it's really sort of been on just a march higher here and looking pretty good, right? Funny thing is, back here on Friday, excuse me, when the overall market sold off really big, boy, that sure looked like the end of the party there, like a big reversal day, right? And you would have almost expected it to sell off hard there, but it didn't. And miraculously, it's managed to sort of continue to climb, and you can see that stop has trailed up very nicely, and we also have like the secondary target, got hit way back here. I talked about that, and so far so good. And I'm not sure if this stop will move today or not, but it's basically in a really good spot here. So everything's looking good. As of the close last night, which is essentially where it is, this thing was up over 13% from here. So this is the this is the open trade that's been open the longest, and looking pretty darn good. Actually looking good. So no matter what happens with this one's going to go in the win column and look pretty good. Let me just quick look at the closed trades here. There was a couple of really nice. We haven't had a closed trade now since the end of January, right? So those last stocks I looked at just hanging out on the open, but I wanted to look at a couple of these closed trades just to see what they look like here, because some of them, I mean, they were beauties. So the Stag was a really nice sort of breakout to new highs. That stop, I the stop on this one's a great example of how the actually system actually like manages the stock. As long as that stock is going up, that stop is trailing up, and then it starts to like really tighten up. You can see that. Remember, I marked this back here. I had this little sort of triangle working back here, and it was going to break one way or the other, and so kind of broke to the downside. But it tagged the stop right here, and that turned out to be a really nice swing trade right there. DXCM, that was another one that this was sort of a weird one, and this will happen too, right? Like this one particular day, Monday, January 27th was one of those days where the market like gapped down at the open significantly, as I recall, and like tons of stocks gapped down, and then they spent the rest of the day going up. Kind of the opposite of today, right? Today we got a big gap up, and basically mostly a fade. You know, we faded even more since the open, but this was one of those sort of days where big gap down and a lot of stocks at the open opened right at the stop, right? Took us out, and lo and behold, the stock is just sort of hung out. And if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for that stop right there, this would still be hanging out well above the target. But this turned out to be a pretty good trade. I mean, from the trigger price to this stop was 12%. So can't complain about that one. DHI was a good example. I'm just kind of going through some of the recent close trades. So the DHI was a good example of why we close the stock ahead of earnings, right? So this thing basically got closed ahead of earnings, and it actually, I forget which it was either I think it was this morning before the open is when they released. It had a big sort of pre-earnings run up, a couple of more days, and then that was it, right? So that's an interesting looking pattern right there. Anyway, so DHI also was with the trigger way back here. It plowed through the targets and just kept going, and then just got closed ahead of earnings, and so ended up being up about 12% from here to the earnings close itself. So basically it's been a pretty good year or so far year to date. It's been pretty good for the closed trades. By the way, on the closed trades here, I separated out all the ones that got closed in 2019, so they're still available down there, but it only made sense to kind of start everything fresh for the new year here, so that these tables weren't too big data wise too. It worked out pretty well. So there you go. We had one so far out of the open, trades that have opened this year and closed this year. We've had one that was a full stop out. That one right there. That was basically it triggered in, reversed, hit the full stop before it had a chance to trail, which is the absolute worst case scenario that can happen, right? And so 4.2% loss on that, not bad. That's nothing to really be all that concerned about. And considering, that we've had plenty that have made up for that. So anyway, all in all, everything looking pretty good. And I was rewatching one of these shows like a week ago, a couple weeks ago, and I forget, it was a show from like several weeks back, 3 or 4, whatever. And what I noticed was that the first part, in hindsight, seemed really boring when I was going through the whole sort of market recap and talking about the overall market and that. And so I was kind of thinking to myself, come on, get to the open trades, and the trades that are triggering, and like what's going on, because everybody knows what the market's doing or whatever. So I figured that maybe I would start gravitating to a little bit less market analysis at the beginning of the shows and sort of dive right in. And so that's what I tried to do today, and basically just went over all the trades that are triggering today. Went over all the open trades. There's 4 triggering today, and there's basically 5. This one triggered yesterday. So you got 4 triggering today, 4 that have been open for a while, and then the BMA, right, which we looked at. And so kind of a quick go through of everything that's happening there. And so I think today I'll go ahead and wrap it up pretty quick. Real quick, let's just look at Tesla. Yeah, it's just kind of a typical. Well, this could turn into what they call the Eiffel Tower pattern, right? This is some crazy stuff here. So, epic short squeeze. I mean, just insane epic short squeeze, and then of course, when something like this happens, you always get people left holding the bag. CNBC did a lot of pumping on this thing yesterday too. They had, it's always been a controversial stock, and personally I've always sort of avoided the controversy, but it was an epic short squeeze because the market cap of this thing was bigger than, like, Ford and GM put together, and then I saw something else that was like the market cap was bigger than Daimler Chrysler and BMW and all these other car companies. I mean, just crazy, and like the valuation per vehicle and all that. So, but I mean, it's a great example of how sort of disconnected. This is a great example of how disconnected any one particular stock can become from, what makes sense and or reality, right? I mean, if anything, they're shutting down plants in China and all this and that, and temporarily, obviously, but it's just a perfect example of how anything can happen based on, market mechanics and money flows and all that. And so, it's also a good reminder of how the market itself can become disconnected from reality for a period of time, and then eventually at some point in time this thing will find a level. Theoretically, at some point in time this thing will find a level that makes sense. So it's hard to value a company like this, no matter how you slice it, because people are looking at potential years down the road. But that's kind of look at that high yesterday was 969 basically. And so these are some huge moves here, down 15% now. And so no telling what happens. Typically when stocks do this, they have these crazy wide ranges, and so I mean this thing could still bounce or it could drop more. I mean anything could happen. There's absolutely no way to know what it does on a short-term basis. So anyhow, so that's basically what I got for you today. No reason to stick around. I managed to jam through everything in a pretty quick manner. So keep your eye on the stocks that are triggering in today. See if anything looks good to you. You can always hold off and see what the market does. Place limit orders at the triggers. You can go in with partial positions. Before I wrap it up, just want to take a quick look, and there you go. Big gap up today. Second gap up in a row, and a pretty decent little fade here. It'll be interesting to see if this gap gets closed. And by the way, I always look at the SPY when it comes to like gaps in that, because the S&P itself, the charts don't always really reflect. They don't reflect the gaps as well as the SPY does. So that's a pretty interesting little pattern right there, right? This is the big coronavirus sell-off, and then I don't know what this is because obviously, the problem hasn't gone away yet, but we'll have to see what happens. So, anyway, I hope you all have a good week, and I will see you back here next Wednesday.